Good evening and welcome members, friends, and distinguished guests to the 63rd annual meeting of the Providence Preservation Society. I am Chris Marsola, Board President of PPS. This has been a challenging year for all of us, and we're glad to get together here today, our supporters, our friends, and advocates, to look forward to the year ahead. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that the Providence Preservation Society is situated upon the ancestral and unceded lands of the Narragansett Nation. This acknowledgement reminds us of the significance of place, the continued existence of Indigenous people, and PPS's commitment to building respectful relationships with those who call these lands home today. I would like to thank our event sponsors shown on the screen, especially our lead sponsor, James Brayton Hall, and the Garden Conservancy. And our partner in preservation sponsor, the Foundry Associates. Your partnership this year is especially meaningful. At this time, I call to order the 63rd annual meeting of the Providence Preservation Society. Based on the registration, we have determined that we have a quorum in order to conduct business. 2020 was certainly an interesting year for everyone, particularly for nonprofits. Like many of us, much of our focus in early spring was ensuring the safety of our staff, making sure that everyone could effectively work remotely. Even with these challenges and dark times, we were able to celebrate the end of our capital campaign, exceeding our $1.1 million goal with a grand total of $1.4 million. We continue to advocate around the city for the Armory, for Superman, for the Citizens Bank Development site, and for many, many others. We expanded our education programs, bringing them online at the same time we were creating entirely new programs, such as workforce training, something you will hear about a little later. Although the year was tough, we ended strong, closing in the red, thanks to the assistance of PPP and to 363 new donors to the annual fund. It is amazing to think that around this time last year, that the last great event before COVID-19, I think really for the entire city, was the Leap Day Winter Bash with the theme of Studio 54. It was attended by over 600 people and raised more than $37,000 for PPS. And luckily, it was not a spreader event. It was also voted Rhode Island Monthly's best local event for Providence and best nonprofit fundraiser statewide in their Best of Rhode Island campaign. This makes the event a 5-time Best of Rhode Island winner. After unfortunately having to cancel our Festival of Historic Houses event in June, we pivoted and produced 2 virtual fundraising events, Cocktails with a View and Deck the Doors, Come Inside, engaging more than 110 participants and raising $4,400 in unrestricted donations to the annual fund. In 2020, we had 363 individual annual fund donors compared to 240 in the previous year, an increase of 51%. Mostly attributable to donations people made in conjunction with our programs. But there were also a number of members that made additional annual fund gifts for the first time. We also had 78 annual fund donors who had never made a contribution to PBS before. We thank all of you. Prior to COVID-19, we gained 1 new partner in preservation, Red House Custom Building. We thank all of you for making this year as productive and successful as it was, and like everyone else, we are very much looking forward to the days ahead. Now to official business. We regularly review and update the organization's bylaws and to ensure that we are in compliance with current laws and best practices. This morning, the revisions were emailed to all registrants. Significant changes included provisions for remote meetings, the creation of the position of president-elect, an anti-discrimination statement, and the board's ability to bring on new trustees between annual meetings. Though the Board of Trustees approved these changes at the December 15th, 2020 meeting, in the interest of transparency, we now ask the membership to ratify these changes. In just a moment, you'll see a poll on your screen. Please cast your vote when prompted. I believe I'm waiting to see if the results of that come back up. Here we go. Okay, the bylaws are approved. Now it is my honor to present for consideration the slate of officers for 2021. For president, starting a 2-year term, Warren Jagger. Each of the following is nominated for a 1-year term. For vice president, Rita Danielle Steele and Kate Swanson. For For treasurer, Laurel Bowerman. For secretary, Carrie Zaslow. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I move that the 2021 slate of officers be approved. In just a moment, you'll see a poll on your screen asking you to vote on the slate of officers. Please vote when prompted. The slate of officers is approved. Congratulations. I would like to sincerely thank all of our returning trustees who have helped to steer the organization through this extraordinary year. Thank you all for your continued commitment to PPS. And this concludes the business of the annual meeting of the Providence Preservation Society. If I may, I'd like to take a moment. I'd like to extend that thank you to all of those trustees, staff members, and our supporters that have had the honor of working with over these many years. While I'm not going anywhere, passing the baton to Warren is my final duty as outgoing president. It has been an adventure from joining a Winter Bash committee some 15 years ago to eventually joining the board and then having the distinct honor of chairing it these last 3 years. I have been witness to an organization that has evolved from advocacy, often centered on the East Side, and whose financial strength was often dictated and directly tied to fundraisers and parties, to what is now a truly citywide organization, effectively advocating on a host of important issues affecting not only our past, but our future. We have a seat at any table. In addition to a successful and well-timed capital campaign, I am most proud of our education programs that enrich our community, particularly an emerging workforce training program that allows the unemployed and underemployed to acquire valuable skills for employment in the preservation field, as well as build basic entrepreneurship. PPS is now putting people to work, and that is only just a start. I cannot think of anyone better to be taking over the helm than Warren Jagger. His steady hands, intelligence, and commitment to this organization and its mission could not be better timed to match. It's been great working with you, and as I promised, I look forward to continuing to work together for PBS. And lastly, none of this would have been possible without an engaged board and dedicated staff. And none of us would have been engaged or dedicated without an executive director that inspires and leads us every day. Thank you, Brent, for everything that you do. It's been an honor to call you both a colleague and a friend. And with that, I invite Executive Director Brent Runyon to share with you all how PPS plans to navigate through what we expect to be another unusual year.
Thank you, Chris. It has been a pleasure serving with you, and I can't thank you enough for your dedication to PPS and to the city of Providence. Members and guests, it is a real pleasure to be with you this evening, though I sorely wish we were together in person. It's also my pleasure to give you a brief overview of what we're working on this year. But before I do, I want to add just one more accolade about Chris Marcella. He mentioned our workforce training program, but what he won't tell you, what I will tell you, is that he was instrumental in the development of it. He and I traveled to Detroit 3 or 4 years ago to see their version of the program. And we were so inspired that we came home and immediately set about planning how to create our own version of it. He continues to champion this program as one of the most important for PPS, not only for our growth, but our impact on the community. So thank you, Chris, for your visionary leadership. And the program is off to a good start. Of the 8 people who completed last year's program, 6 were hired by local companies to restore windows, and 1 is completing an additional fellowship to further his skills. At the end of 2020, we learned our program was awarded a $140,000 grant through the State Department of Labor and Training. That will allow us to build an even more robust program this year. For old building owners like me, like many of you, this program will be a boon. People are clamoring to hire our graduates, and several of you have. In the coming months, we will work with our program partners, the Rhode Island Builders Association and Dorcas International, our training partner, Heritage Restoration, and our employer partners, the Providence Revolving Fund and Red House Custom Building, to equip a dozen people with skills they can use to build lives for themselves while bringing buildings to good repair and efficiency. Stay tuned for more on that program this spring. Another critical initiative this year is our strategic planning process. If 2020 was a year of reckoning for the racist underpinnings of our nation, it was also one in which preservation organizations across the country began to examine how we may be unintentionally perpetuating unjust systems. And so in 2021, we're going to be working with neighborhood association partners to address citywide policies so that they will better serve Providence residents, especially those of who have historically been disenfranchised from planning processes like historic preservation. Additionally, we are turning a critical eye to everything from the tree ordinance to the zoning code. City policies must be strengthened to protect and perpetuate the characteristics that make Providence a great place to live for everyone. While the pandemic slowed development planning throughout the city and the state, we are going to see several projects we reviewed in prior years come to fruition this year, including several in the 195 and jewelry districts. There are also a few projects in the wings that we may regrettably see again this year. The Fane organization's tower is moving along slowly, but we expect to see a case before the Supreme Court. Our partners at Building Bridges Providence are championing the issue, and we continue to strategize with them on a regular basis. And although we thought a grossly out of scale hotel on Angel Street was defeated, that project seems likely to return this year as well. It is impossible to know what other projects may come forward this year, but you can count on PPS to be vigilant, engaging the community to champion the good ones, advising developers on how to make the mediocre ones better, and working with everyone to defeat the ones that just aren't right for our community. Another initiative we look forward to this year is the expansion of properties that will be included in the local historic district. Since 2013, BPS has been supporting the goals of residents of the area on the east side around Cook and Manning Streets who want to protect the character of their neighborhood by using the historic district zoning overlay. With Councilman Gonzalez's leadership, it appears likely that this can happen in the next few months. Connecting people with place will also be among our top priorities this year. You may have seen our e-newsletter, which just went out this week. We began a new series we're calling I Know a Place, where we ask people to talk about the charming landscapes and architectural wonders that make Providence, Providence. Let us know if we can feature you. We want to know what's of interest to you. We also want to continue sharing knowledge. It's critical for us to do that, to build support and endearment for places we love. We are continuing to make our archives available and relevant to the public. This year, we intend to finish digitizing our massive slide collection with its images that cover much of the 20th century and incorporate our other longest running online property site, the Mary A. Gowdy Library of House Histories, into our modern online guide to Providence architecture. The online guide will continue to evolve over time. This year, we plan to diversify it, specifically adding and expanding descriptions of College Hill sites related to the African diaspora, and also adding new sites related to Providence's LGBTQ+ history. And of course, we are a society, we're social. As Chris just mentioned, our Winter Bash will not be happening again this year. But though it's going to be an unusual year for events, we are happy to announce something that is concrete, which is our collaboration with the Garden Conservancy to present a citywide tour of gardens and cultural landscapes. We're optimistic that we'll be able to produce a safe event that allows socially distanced gathering, exploring, and learning. My staff will tell you that I've mentioned just a small fraction of the work we'll do this year. With our team and the support of our board, our members, and our community, we will do all of the things I mentioned and much more. So I want to thank you for your support of our work this past year and this coming year. I look forward to seeing you all in June at our garden event. And now Rachel Robinson, our Director of Preservation Extraordinaire, will announce this year's most endangered properties.
Thank you, Brent, and good afternoon, everyone. Just one moment, please. This is my fourth time to present the most endangered properties list. It is not quite a pleasure to perform this duty. After all, these are 10 properties across Providence that mean something to her citizens and that are endangered and struggling. However, these are structures and buildings, and I am optimistic that with the help of the people in our community, they can be useful and contributing again. From past MEP list, we have a record of successes and losses. This commercial building on the West End was listed just last year and on the brink of being saved and incorporated into a new development. Sadly, through willful neglect and partial collapse, it was demolished in November. On the bright side, 25 years after being listed, the Meeting Street steps were restored again and rededicated. And now let us inaugurate the 2021 MEP list and hope for promising outcomes. No surprise here. The Industrial Trust Building will top our MEP list until it is saved. We here together are the Providence Preservation Society, and we would not be a very good preservation society in Providence if we did not prioritize the adaptive reuse of the state's tallest and most iconic building. Last year, the Superman building received remarkable attention from a RISD graduate studio in the Department of Interior Architecture. The students designed 7 creative but plausible reuse schemes and have presented them to a virtual global audience. You can see more on our website. PPS will continue to beat the drum in advocating for this building so central to Providence's psyche and success. This unnamed, underloved residence illustrates several things. First, South Elmwood has some glorious residential architecture. It's one of my favorite parts of the city. Second, restoration work is generational and ongoing. This building is roughly 140 years old, and with some proper restoration can continue to house people for another century. Finally, like people, every building has a story. I hope you'll enjoy some of the secrets and speculation we've unlocked about this one. Poor Grace Church Cemetery. The desecration of graves seems to me to be a particularly disrespectful act. But then again, we don't always treat the living with respect. This final resting place is a notable landscape feature of the Trinity Square Historic District on the National Register, and highly visible at the Broad Street and Elmwood Avenue split. I invite you to learn more about the Trinity Gateway Historical Improvement Association and their ongoing conservation efforts of the cemetery. We are not giving up on the Broad Street Synagogue. Surely this handsome landmark in Elmwood can serve the community again. The City of Providence is trying to find a new owner who will have to tackle significant deferred maintenance, including re-roofing the structure. If you are interested in learning more or know someone who might be, please reach out to us. All right, grab the Kleenex because this one is a heartbreaker. Listed 3 times previously, the former Ward Baking Administration Company building will likely be our first casualty of the 2021 MEP list. Lack of vision, willful neglect by owner Rhode Island Hospital, and a state-level reversal of a decision by the city's building inspector means that this building is facing imminent and unnecessary demolition. PBS wants to use this situation and loss to advocate for more stringent and penal use of demolition by neglect and to demand that the city fulfill its enforcement obligation. Don't you think 2 rare architectural survivors, 1 federal period and 1 late Victorian, deserve a little more respect than being dwarfed by a new high-rise neighbor? For the record, PPS does not oppose the design or modular construction of the proposed development at 155 Chestnut. This building would be an exciting addition at numerous vacant and available parcels in the Jewelry District or the I-195 redevelopment district. It does not belong at this location. Allow me to draw your attention to this spot on Harris Avenue, located in the southern part of Smith Hill. The history of this stylish little commercial building dates back to the post-Prohibition era and was fueled by thirsty Rhode Islanders. It was built as the standard wholesale liquors company and most recently served as a more retail liquor outlet. We are hopeful that new ownership will bring this holdout from our railroad and commerce history back to life. We at PPS were deeply saddened to learn of the Christmas Day fire at the Prince Hall Masonic Temple. If there is a silver lining, it is that we've been introduced to a remarkable civic organization and its members with roots going back to the late 18th century, and learned about a long forgotten Lower South Providence schoolhouse. The award-winning Almy Street School, seen here in the upper right, on the West End, provided many clues to help us nail down the history of this building, built in 1893 and used as the Masonic Temple since 1966. PPS is working with the Providence Revolving Fund to offer as much assistance as we can to the Prince Hall Masons in their efforts to rebuild. We first listed the Crook Point Bascule Bridge last year, stretching the definition of what constitutes an endangered property. Threatened by demolition plans at the state in 2019, the mayor and city took a keen interest in this iconic industrial relic. A design competition was launched and a whopping 78 participants answered the call. We're anticipating an announcement of the 5 finalists to be followed by a winner named later this spring. While this has been exciting activity, PPS is concerned that funding will not be available for implementation of what could certainly be an interactive landmark. Providence is a great city. We have our challenges, but we have rich history and many positive attributes. Why then would a community member nominate the entire city to the MVP list? Because we all need a wake-up call about climate change at the local level. We are a river city in the ocean state, and the impacts of climate change and sea level rise will affect Providence's built and cultural heritage in both incremental and profound ways. The good news is that historic preservation is an inherently sustainable practice, and all of us can be part of the solution. I invite you to read our full statement on endangered Providence and descriptions of all of our properties on the 2021 MEP list on our website. Now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome tonight's keynote speaker, Emily Anthous. Preservationists like to talk about how buildings shape the way we think and feel about a place. I'm guilty. And old buildings, we argue, generally make a positive impact. But it isn't very often that we dig into the science of why exactly these places, streetscapes, buildings, and rooms affect us so profoundly. And if there was any doubt at all about the power of place, we're all a bit more familiar with how the 4 walls of our own homes have had an impact on our psyches over the last year. Emily Anthous is a science journalist and author. Her new book, The Great Indoors, The Surprising Science of How Buildings Shape Our Behavior, Health, and Happiness, was published in June. And rarely has a new book spoken to the current moment like this one. Emily's work has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Wired, Nature, Slate, Business Week, and elsewhere. Her magazine features have won several journalism awards. Emily has a master's degree in science writing from MIT and a bachelor's degree in the history of science and medicine from Yale, where she also studied creative writing. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, and joins us from there now. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone for joining. I am hopefully sharing my screen right now. Great, can everyone see that? Give a shout in the chat if there's, oops, hold on, I did something here. Sorry, let me try that one more time. You'd think by now I would be used to this. Great. So I'm Emily Anthous. I'm a science journalist, and my book, The Great Indoors, The Surprising Science of How Buildings Shape Our Behavior, Health, and Happiness, came out this past year. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about humane design and how we can create spaces that actually encourage human flourishing. So modern humans are an indoor species. We spend about 90% of our time indoors. Over the last few decades, a growing body of research has made clear that our indoor environments affect nearly every aspect of our lives. And these findings open up really exciting opportunities. They give us the chance to create buildings and spaces that actually improve occupant health and well-being. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is walk through some of the elements of the indoor environment that we know really matter and how we can remake these environments to help improve our lives. So one of the absolute best things you can do to create healthy and restorative indoor environments is to find ways to incorporate nature. There's a really robust scientific literature on this, and it is very convincing. And a lot of this stems back to one very influential study, which was conducted at a Pennsylvania hospital in the early 1980s. So one wing of this hospital looked like this diagram you see here. The patient rooms along this corridor were essentially identical except for one factor. About half of the rooms looked out onto a stand of trees. The other half of the rooms, however, had a view simply of a brick wall. A pioneering researcher named Roger Ulrich got curious about whether these differing views might actually be affecting patient outcomes. So he went back and analyzed the medical records of people who'd had their gallbladders removed at this hospital. Half of the patients he selected had the rooms that looked out onto the trees, and the other half had the rooms that looked out onto this brick wall. And it turns out that he found stark differences. On average, the patients who had nature views needed fewer doses of narcotics than those whose rooms looked out onto a brick wall. They were also discharged from the hospital about a full day sooner. In the years since, many researchers have confirmed and expanded upon these findings. There are now numerous studies that show that exposure to nature can reduce pain, reduce stress, reduce blood pressure, and even boost the immune system. What makes nature so potent? One common explanation is what's known as the Biophilia Hypothesis. The general idea is that because of how we evolved out in the rough and tumble of nature, we have an innate affinity for the natural world. So nature catches our eye and engages us, and therefore serves as essentially a positive distraction, taking our minds off of any stress, pain, or anxiety we might otherwise be feeling. And we also know that when we're feeling restful and relaxed, our bodies can invest its resources in other things, like our immune systems, which is maybe why having these positive distractions can boost our immune function. But it turns out that nature isn't just good for our bodies. It also has a variety of cognitive benefits, including improving attention, memory, learning, and productivity. For instance, scientists have found that test scores are higher at schools that are surrounded by greenery. They've also found that bringing plants, houseplants, desk plants into offices improves productivity and concentration. Scientists explain these cognitive benefits with what's known as attention restoration theory. The theory holds that the tasks of everyday life are cognitively taxing. Looking at nature, on the other hand, is an effortless kind of engagement. It catches our eye, but it doesn't require our brains to do a lot of difficult cognitive work. And so essentially that's giving our brains a break. So then when we look away from nature and get back to whatever's on our to-do list, our attention is restored and refreshed. And the good and interesting news about these findings is that when it comes to incorporating nature into our indoor spaces, it seems like almost any kind of nature can do the trick. So a lot of the early studies, like Roger Ulrich's, were focused on views of nature. And we know that buildings that provide windows that have views of natural landscapes have all sorts of benefits for people. But even if that doesn't describe your home or your office, all is not lost. Studies suggest that bringing in indoor plants, even putting up nature images, so, photos of landscapes, or even playing nature sounds like birdsong and babbling brooks can all have some of these same stress relieving benefits. Another really key way to improve our indoor spaces is to find ways to maximize daylight. And the reason that daylight is so important is because it keeps our circadian rhythms, or our body's internal clocks, synchronized with the sun and the solar day. Daylight exposure, we know, is particularly important in the morning. It's exposure to short wavelength light. So that's the light that's on the cooler, bluer end of the spectrum, and it's plentiful in natural bright daylight. It's this light that tells our bodies that morning has arrived, and it helps suppress our daytime levels of melatonin. And having circadian rhythms that are properly synchronized in this way and in sync with what the sun is doing helps us both remain alert during the day and fall asleep better and sleep better at night. There's also a well-documented connection between sunlight and mood. Exposure to more light and brighter light seems to make us happier. The exact mechanism here is a bit unclear still, but there's a lot of research that suggests that light exposure actually boosts production of serotonin, which is a hormone that helps regulate mood. So that is one leading possibility for an explanation for this connection. What's more, we also know that daylight, like nature, improves job satisfaction and workplace cognitive performance. And like nature, it has similar benefits for students. We know that students in sunny classrooms, for instance, have higher test scores than those in dark ones. There's also a lot of evidence that hospital patients in sunny rooms tend to fare better than those in shady ones. They use fewer painkillers, report less stress, are discharged sooner, and even have lower mortality rates. So how can you actually harness the power of daylight in your home or office, or these days, home office? It's probably too late right now to knock down a bunch of walls and add windows. That's not really a quick fix, but there are smaller changes you can make. As I mentioned, it's particularly important to get light exposure in the morning. So if there's a place in your home or your office that gets a lot of morning light, you might want to consider starting your day there and at least soaking up some of these rays in the first few hours of the day. Another thing you might want to explore is what's known as circadian lighting. So this is a relatively new development in technology, but the idea is to create artificial lighting schemes that better mimic natural light and the way that it changes over the course of the day. And you can now, for not very much money, buy bulbs that emit this bright, cool, bluish light that we know is so important in the morning, during the morning hours. But then over the course of the day, these bulbs transition into putting out warmer, more amber colored light in the late afternoon and evening. And we know that that's the kind of light that is less likely to interfere with our sleep in the evening. Finally, if your home is really dark, especially during the winter, you might want to consider getting a light therapy lamp, which is now a fairly accessible intervention. You can order them online nearly anywhere. I should say, though, that this is considered a medical intervention, so I recommend that you discuss it with your doctor. That's another fairly accessible way to make sure your body's getting the light that it needs. So a third really important component of our indoor environments is air quality. And that's something that I know a lot of us have been thinking more about lately because of the pandemic. And indeed, we know that all sorts of dangerous things can in fact linger in indoor air. One, of course, is pathogens like the coronavirus, but the other is pollutants. So all sorts of consumer products, including our furniture, our flooring, our electronics, our personal care products, they all give off chemicals that can pollute the air. And some of our own behaviors and activities, especially cooking and cleaning, which I think are also two activities we're also doing a lot more of these days, can also generate high levels of these pollutants. And these chemicals have well-documented health effects and can cause a variety of lung, heart, and vascular problems. And air pollutants, we are learning, can have cognitive effects too. One really obvious example is every time we exhale, we are breathing out, of course, carbon dioxide. And it turns out that when there are a lot of people in a room or a room is poorly ventilated, so imagine maybe a small conference room or a packed lecture hall, carbon dioxide levels in those rooms can actually get high enough to impair our thinking and to affect our performance on all sorts of cognitive tests and tasks. So how can you improve your indoor air quality? Well, the key here is really ventilation, ventilation, ventilation. So increasing the airflow can curb the spread of infectious disease and reduce our exposure to potentially toxic pollutants. And we can use a variety of strategies to improve ventilation in our buildings. So the basic underlying strategy is to increase the rate of ventilation. So that's how frequently the air in the room is being replaced with fresh air. If you have some kind of central HVAC system, you can change the settings. So you're increasing what's known as the outdoor air fraction. That means that more fresh air is coming in from outdoors and you're doing less just recirculating of the air that's already inside. A very low-tech way of doing the same thing is to open the windows. That will also increase your ventilation rate and the rate of air turnover. If you have exhaust fans, you're particularly likely to have them in your kitchen or bathroom. Make sure that you actually use them. A lot of people don't bother to turn them on, but especially when you're cooking and cleaning, they can be really helpful for reducing the level of pollutants in your home. Also, depending on what kind of ventilation system you have and your access to it, you may be able to install higher quality air filters, which can help trap particles and also droplets of fluid that could be carrying viruses or other pathogens. Unfortunately, many home ventilation systems aren't made for these sort of super heavy duty air filters, which have really been designed for hospitals and large commercial buildings. But if that's not an option, you can consider getting a portable air cleaner. And that is essentially a standalone device that's equipped with these same high-powered air filters, and it will do very similar work of trapping anything that happens to be hanging out in the air in your home. So far, I have mostly been talking about some of the direct effects of the indoor environment. But indoor spaces can also affect our health and well-being indirectly, and they do that by shaping our behavior. For example, we can consider an emerging discipline that's known as active design. And active design revolves around the idea that we can create environments that nudge people into being more active, just as they go about their everyday lives. And the reason this is important is because research shows that incorporating even a little bit more movement into our daily routines can have real health benefits. In large long-term studies, researchers have found, for instance, that men who climb as few as 3 flights of stairs a day can reduce their odds of an early death. But in a lot of ways, movement has been designed out of our buildings. Consider what you see when you walk into most new commercial high-rises. Elevators get pride of place. They are prominently positioned in bright gleaming lobbies, and they're practically demanding to be ridden. Stairwells, on the other hand, if you can find them at all, are hidden behind these heavy, imposing fire doors. They're often dark, they're dingy, they're narrow, they're not pleasant, and it's no wonder that most of us don't default to taking them. Studies show, however, that with careful design, we can actually flip the script, and we can encourage people to skip the elevator and take the stairs by doing a variety of things, including designing staircases that are visible, convenient, wide, aesthetically appealing, and architecturally distinct. Displaying artwork or playing music in stairwells can also increase stair use. And so can what are known as stair prompts, or highly visible signs mounted by stairs and elevators that encourage people to take the stairs. So that's nudging people into being more active. We can also design environments that help us make healthier food choices. As anyone who's ever kept candy on their desk has probably discovered for themselves, we are much more likely to consume food when it's within easy reach. So making wholesome food more prominent, accessible, and convenient, or conversely, making junk food more difficult to acquire, can actually nudge our diets in a healthier direction. One of my favorite demonstrations of this idea comes from a study at an elementary school where researchers did a simple milk swap. So in this school cafeteria, typically both white and chocolate milk were readily available. They were stacked in neighboring crates right in front of the lunch counter. But for 1 week, the researchers hid the chocolate cartons behind the counter and posted a sign telling students that if they wanted chocolate milk, all they had to do was ask for it. As a result of this one simple change, the share of students who were selecting white milk at lunch, which of course is healthier and lower in sugar, jumped from 30 to 48%. So that's a brief overview of a few of the different ways that indoor environments can affect our health, behavior, and well-being. What I'd like to do in the time I have left is show you a few interesting building projects where designers and developers have put some of these ideas into practice. What I think is particularly interesting is how far some of these lessons are spreading and how many different kinds of buildings and environments they're being applied to. So this is a project here in New York where I live. This is Arbor House. It's an affordable housing development in a Bronx neighborhood where 40% of local residents live below the poverty line. And one of the things that the developers wanted to do here was demonstrate that it's possible to create affordable housing that is aesthetically appealing, good for occupants, and also good for the planet. So they invested heavily in sustainability and energy efficiency. Arbor House has a LEED Platinum certification, which is not easy to get. And you'll notice that the facade is just dominated by these large windows, which brings a lot of daylight into the building. Moving inside the building, the designers put a real premium on indoor air quality. They selected paints, finishes, and materials that are known as low VOC, which means they emit minimal levels of the volatile organic compounds that frequently contaminate indoor air. They also thought really carefully about ventilation. Every apartment has its own exhaust fan that continuously vents directly to the outside, and there are no shared ventilation ducts in the building. Researchers have found that these features can actually improve respiratory health and reduce asthma symptoms of residents. The designers also really embraced nature. Here's a big green living wall in the building's lobby. There's also a 10,000 square foot hydroponic farm on the building's roof, which uses harvested rainwater and grows produce that feeds both the building's tenants as well as other families in the neighborhood. Here's an outdoor exercise and play area, which is designed to appeal to both children and adults. and also designed to encourage physical activity, which is something that the designers embraced in several other ways as well. So there's an indoor gym with a climbing wall. Here are stair prompts hung outside the staircases, and the designers also painted designs in the stairwells themselves and play music in there as well. Moving on to a second case study. This is the campus of Buckingham Primary and Elementary Schools in rural Virginia. And it was designed entirely around the principles of active design. The designers were fortunate. This is a rural county, so they had a sprawling property to work with. And they really took advantage of that by designing all sorts of outdoor amenities, including multiple playgrounds and sports fields, and this sort of meandering network of walking paths. They also included spaces for outdoor learning, including a full-fledged outdoor classroom. And even the indoor spaces really do a good job of bringing the outdoors in and providing access to nature. This is the art studio, which has an outdoor terrace, and as you can see, these sweeping landscape views. The designers also embrace the power of stairs. This is a prominent, appealing, very well lit staircase that's right inside the main entrance to the school. And they have playful stair prompts like this posted all around the campus, encouraging kids to take the stairs. Instead of long featureless hallways, they also created what they called learning streets, which were studded with reading nooks and small group workspaces. And the idea here is to encourage students and teachers to walk more and move throughout the school building over the course of the day. And the research so far has been really promising. In one study, researchers found that the school's design actually appeared to increase the amount of light physical activity that students are getting by about an hour a day, which is enormously significant. Finally, briefly, one third case study for you, and this one maybe will surprise you. This is Las Colinas Detention and Reentry Facility in San Diego County, California. And it's a women's jail that initially opened in the 1960s, but was entirely redesigned in 2014. It was deliberately designed to look and function more like a college campus than a jail. You can really see that idea here. It's an open park-like campus with numerous walking paths and outdoor recreational spaces. It's another rendering of the campus. And the majority of the women who are detained here are classified as being a low security risk. And with that comes the privilege and freedom to be able to move around the campus freely without an escort or a guard. Here's a day room inside one of the housing units at the jail. And here is the day room in a different housing unit. Notice that both of the day rooms have these panoramic nature photos on the wall, and they have those in every housing unit on campus. There are also these big walls of windows, which are bringing in a ton of daylight. So officials in the county are still tracking the long-term outcomes of the women who are detained here, but they have already found that the redesign has dramatically reduced violence at the jail. Attacks on inmate violence and inmate on officer violence dropped by roughly 50% after moving into this new facility. So why am I showing you these projects? I realize that some of them, particularly say a brand new jail, is pretty different from the buildings that the Providence Preservation Society is most interested in and focused on. But what I really wanted to do this afternoon was drive home the idea that I think everyone has a right to good design. And architecture is really a reflection of who and what we value. And regardless of who we're designing for, I think we have a real moral imperative to create spaces that respect human dignity and encourage human flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. If you don't mind, once everyone has a moment, well, there we go. They can get in touch with you if they need to. Let me share screen once more.
I can also drop my contact info in the chat if anyone wants it.
Yes, please, that would be great. All right, thank you so much. That was reminded me of some of the biophilia learning that I did in graduate school. Those case studies were great, and thank you for bringing it back to historic preservation, because of course, everyone deserves great design is one of the mantras that we try to promote as well. I see that we had one early question in the chat, and it was about asking you about smells. And I think this was different from air purification. But I suppose this could go both ways. How do we bring good smells in if we're unable to open a window? And how can we get bad smells out of our environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I should preface this by saying we don't know a lot about smell yet. Interestingly, I mean, maybe this is predictable, but a lot of the research that's been done on smell has been in like retail environments. So, you know, there are a lot of companies interested in like, oh, if we diffuse lavender or peppermint throughout the store, like, will that make people buy more? We don't know nearly as much in terms of just general well-being. We have reason to believe that certain smells can affect our behavior. And so like, I know there's some interesting studies showing that even just the aroma of coffee can actually improve our attention and focus. And so that's something researchers are studying. I think that one of the tricky things about smells is that smells contain sort of these essential oils or particles. And if you're smelling something, it's because there are these volatile organic compounds in the air. And we still don't know a lot about what that may or may not be doing to our health. So there's a lot left to learn. There's reason to think that adding some aromas to our environments could be beneficial, but I think we also want to be pretty careful because their effects on physical health and particularly our respiratory health are still a little bit of an unknown. That might not be a super satisfying answer, but that's sort of where we are.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I'm a person who suffers from migraines, so I know that
Me too.
there are those of us who are very sensitive to smell and light, and I think the more natural the elements can be in our indoor and outdoor environments, the more pleasing and healthful. Well, I just want to thank you very much. I encourage everyone to get a copy of Emily's book and read it. Perhaps one day we can invite her to be with us in person in Providence. But this was really a nice talk for us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And, you know, I know our time is limited, but I'm happy to continue the conversation with people. I dropped my contact info in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you have questions.
Great, thank you very much. The phone, I'm at the office right now. The phone is ringing. I don't know who's calling because 100 of our closest friends are on this call with us today. But anyway, I would now like to formally introduce our brand new board chair, Mr. Warren Jagger, and I will turn the program over to Warren.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Emily. It's certainly an honor to be elected president of the Preservation Society. I have long admired this organization, and I am humbled to assume this role. And I promise you my hard work to do the best I can. It's a privilege to succeed Chris and his great leadership. Chris, we owe you a lot for your service. And as a gesture to that gratitude, I hope Kelsey can get this up on the screen. I, with the help of PPS and through my gift, we commissioned this painting of the old brick schoolhouse, and it will be presented to you in person soon. It's by Sam Green, a wonderful, soon-to-be famous local artist. He also teaches at the Providence Art Club. So again, thank you, Chris, and we owe you a great deal.
That is very sweet. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify one thing before we close, and that is that, as Chris mentioned, we did technically end our year in the fiscal situation, what might be termed the red, though that does not count the expected forgiveness of the federal PPP loan that we received. Were that to be forgiven, and our accountant insists it will be, but it seems not to be able to be done until this year, 2021. But technically, or actually, we ended the year in the black and managed our expenses frugally and well. So thank you again, Chris. Thank you to all our dedicated board members, our excellent and professional staff, our sponsors, particularly those for this evening. And lastly, I would like to thank all of you who are watching, all of you who tuned in tonight, to our loyal supporters and members. On your behalf, we are all working to make it an even better Providence. Thank you again, and good night.